I live in the middle of nowhere to live now and be here. Let's welcome David Irwin.
I appreciate the opportunity to come back and share and to discuss things that have been, on my mind and on my heart. Um, a way I'd like to approach this is to come at it from two parts. Um, I believe coming from an intuitive place is a quite powerful place to come from. So first, I'm going to share a piece that I've written. The second part of the talk, I would like to get a little bit more specific with some of the research I've been doing, with why I believe people are leaving cities in such mass. And I'll begin with something I've written. Projects created on the land, they evoke the connection to here and now, presence, the absolute. The only thing that is real, the present, not the future and not the past. Wondrous space, an atmosphere that enraptures people and captivates their imaginations, using as materials sunlight, solid wall, and empty space. Breathe. Ah, now you're living. When we step into this, we create works of architecture additive in nature. They are built upon the land or subtractive in nature as they build within the land. Architecture is never of a foreign strain or species, but always an extension of the land. A habitation of the land, a levelish land that can go up or down in relation to the horizon. Now, in the distance, is that land without architecture? Yes, it is. Perhaps it is. I checked it out, and it is. And in this way, we leave it be. We do not need to interfere with this. It already serves the person, the occupant, to have it as such. In a scream, I hear, but we need another gas station, and we certainly would like another shopping complex. And the old man in the corner of the room sat in silence. A whisper slips from his lips. I have always longed for a clean slate, unaltered and devoid of the unnecessary. The old man continued, this time with an alarming gaze. If this is a time for a need, for someone to take shelter, to bathe indoors, to cook a meal protected from the elements, to make love not under the stars, well, then it seems we need to create an enclosed space, don't we? Perhaps. And if we do this, let us not forget it is the land that is creating the architecture, for all that we build with architecture once came from the land. That was a manifesto I wrote for my studio in February of 2018. Something quite apparent to me, and I wager quite apparent to many of us, is that there's a massive urban diaspora that's well underway with the dynamics of how we live in the city and other places changing at a rapid pace. Based on my research, since 2010, urban centers have begun to shrink in population. This is looking at the work of Derek Thompson, the writer, who writes for The Atlantic. Derek's work reflects that in 2018, each day in Los Angeles, 201 people left to not return. In 2018, 277 people would leave every day from New York City to not return. And I wager that nowadays in 2021, with a pandemic, it's even more intense. Another note, an economist by the name of Jed Kalko in 2017, his research reflects that there was a strong rise in the educated rural community, which was outpacing the rest of American migration. With the onset of the pandemic, it's again my understanding that these numbers are much higher than what I just read. And I'm deeply interested in not only why other people are leaving the urban centers, but frankly, why it is that I had this intuition to leave the urban center myself, where I resided for over 13 years. So despite the obvious trends for real estate fortune, I think it's important to look past seemingly obvious reasons for this coastal diaspora, including real estate, the beauty of the rural environment, and to really think about, well, what's going on under the hood? What are the desires that are being satiated by coming to environments that are not the city? So I wager that it has much to do with a quest for our most human of aspects of our hearts, desiring in at least some capacity to be satiated. As I mentioned, my talk today and the research has much to do with my own experience of leaving the city. As I attempt to make sense of why it is that I did leave, moving to the desert. I think it's important to also note, I've started a series of gatherings at my house in Joshua Tree under the name of Why We Left, with friends and artists. Really, it's an experiment to spend time with one another. It's a great excuse for that. And to also to see what comes of it, to see what comes out. I believe that artists and creative people, we have the capacity to put into material world things that are not material. So I think it's a great platform for artists and writers, musicians to put forth some of the thoughts of why it is that they left where they came from and why we're here. And right now, I believe, is a time to ask ourselves these deeper philosophical, anthropological, architectural, and spiritual questions, especially as the country is on the precipice of opening up, with the pandemic seemingly aside us, soon to be behind us, so to speak. And I also believe it's timely to have the opportunity to share this with a audience. So, as I mentioned, in pondering the question of why we left, leaving these urban centers, I've distilled out 5 larger desires that I hope you can directly pull from the manifesto I just read. So these are the core desires that I began to write about for coastal diaspora in the early 21st century. The first being a desire for physical space. I believe that's quite self-evident. Having space feels good, space to wander, space to sleep, space to eat. And I think the unspoken is also space that we can call our very own. You can say that the ability to have space is akin to being able to have an extension of our comfort zone past the limits of just our physical bodies and our skin. The second desire is the desire for a small, tight-knit community, which I've been very fortunate to find in several capacities in the desert, including the spiritual center. To be able to have rapport with others is vital to our existence. Many of us know the phrase Dunbar's number. It was coined in the 90s, and that number is 150 people, and roughly speaking, it's 150 people who you can, and this is described by Dunbar herself, that you can, I believe it's approach in a bar and be welcomed into a conversation Uh, the way I like to think about it is to spend time with others who significantly support your own endeavors. And I would argue that the city itself is a place that one can have many of connections, perhaps way over 150. However, many of them are passing connections. And the satiation I know that I'm have searched for and still searching for, and I wager others are as well, have to do with the sense of community and really deep connection with others in that community. The third desire is a desire for detoxification of an overload of input. Really, it's a simplifying of information coming in and an enjoyment of just basking in silence. Mm-hmm. The fourth desire is a desire for molding nature. One way you can think about this is the alchemical process where the sum is much greater than the parts alone. This is evident in the creation of a child. This is evident in any artist creating work as well. The fifth desire is a desire for untouched nature. I wager this has something to do with being, not needing to be in control. It's a faith, it's a relinquishing of power. And I also wager it's to be in the presence of the divine. Feeling the constancy and reliability around us that untouched nature affords us it's so magical. I think of feeding the quail in the morning and them gathering under the creosotes and the different choyas and the different bushes that we have out here in the desert. There's this beautiful life cycle of understanding that I'm feeding those birds and they're using those bushes and shrubs for cover from the hawk. And there's this beautiful cycle that I know that I'm part of. So in closing, I'd like to quote a grassroots activist from New York. She wrote, "My purpose is to help." Oh, and the reason I'm saying this is this so resonates with me, this passage. And I'd like to leave you with this as my own intention, borrowing from her. "My purpose is to help stir up some creative thinking, now lacking, about effects of time and change on neighborhoods. Above all, to stir up thinking about how to enlist time and change as practical allies. We might as well learn how to make constructive alliances with the workings of time, because time is going to continue happening. That's for sure." That was Jane Jacobs in 2000. We're at a pivotal time in history, and this talk obviously being given at the Center for Spiritual Living in Yucca Valley, California, a rural place in the country. I feel so fortunate to be in the middle of this. And at the end of the day, I believe we all have the capacity to go within and to not only think about the desires that we have, but to think about the intentions we have and how to make those manifest. And perhaps it looks like organizing your community. Perhaps it looks like organizing your animals. Perhaps it looks like starting that project. But I wager we have so much capacity in the world today. There is such massive change that's happening that I think is so much more apparent now to everybody than it has ever been. And I have much gratitude for being able to share this work with you. Thank you.